Doom was not just another old video game. For a lot of people, it was the video game. The game that felt dangerous, the game that felt forbidden, the game that felt like the future had kicked the front door in and brought a shotgun with it. It was loud, violent, fast, demonic and completely different from what most people had seen before. And then one day, after a tragedy in Littleton, Colorado, Doom stopped being just a game. It became a target. It became a symbol. And for a while, it became one of the most blamed pieces of entertainment in the world. What followed was not just a controversy about one shooter game. It was one of the biggest moral panics gaming had ever seen. A panic that pulled in parents, politicians, news networks, courtrooms, grieving families and an entire culture desperately trying to explain something horrifying. Because after Columbine, people did not just ask what happened, they asked what to blame, and Doom was standing right there. Back in the early 1990s, Doom felt almost unreal. Today, it's easy to look at the chunky graphics and old-school sprites and forget just how shocking this game really was when it first came out. But in 1993, Doom did not just feel impressive, it felt illegal. It felt like something you were not supposed to be playing. It was created by ID Software, and very quickly it became much bigger than just another PC game. The speed, the violence, the atmosphere, the level design, the sound, everything about it felt aggressive, alive and new. And that is what made Doom so powerful. People did not just play it, they copied it, shared it, modded it, traded levels and turned it into a culture. It spread through schools, homes, offices, friend groups like Contraband, two players that made it legendary. To outsiders, it may look dangerous, and that tension mattered. Because long before the biggest scandal ever hit Doom, the game was already becoming exactly the kind of thing adults were prepared to fear. One of the things people loved most about Doom was how much freedom it gave them. You were not just playing through levels made by developers, you could build your own rooms, your own hallways, your own little worlds, places inspired by your imagination, your home, or somewhere familiar. That was part of what made Doom feel so different. It was not just a game people played, it was a game people shaped. But that freedom came with a darker side. Because in 1999, one person was not using Doom just to build for fun. He had other plans. And after what happened next, people would start asking a terrifying question. Was Doom just a game? Or had it become something else? On April 20th, 1999, Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, became the scene of the most infamous school shooting in history. But what made the case even more disturbing was that the massacre was not just supposed to be a shooting. It was supposed to be something much bigger. The two attackers had planned for a bombing first. The idea was that homemade explosives placed in high school cafeteria would go off while students were gathering inside, causing chaos on a scale far beyond what the public first understood. When those bombs failed to detonate, the plan collapsed into something else. And what followed became the version of Columbine the world would remember. At around 11:19 AM in the morning, the attack began. Students were outside eating lunch, talking, walking between areas, doing completely normal things, when gunfire suddenly broke out. Panic spread almost instantly. Some people thought it was a prank, some did not understand what they were hearing. Others started running before they even fully knew why. Within minutes, the school had fallen into chaos. People ran through hallways, people hid under desks, people locked themselves in rooms. Teachers tried to protect students with almost no time to react. Calls to emergency services began pouring in. The library, would become one of the most infamous locations in the entire attack, and for many people, it remains the part of the Columbine story that is hardest to forget. Students hid under tables and behind furniture, while the attackers entered and moved through the room. The atmosphere inside was pure terror. Some survivors later described hearing footsteps, voices, gunfire, crying, begging, and long stretches of uncertainty where nobody knew if they were about to be found next. And this is part of why Columbine hit so hard. It was not just the death toll, it was the feeling of helplessness. The feeling that an ordinary school day had turned into a nightmare in real time, in a place that was supposed to be safe. Police arrived, but like many mass casualty situations at the time, the response became part of the wider controversy too. Early tactical approaches, confusion about what happened inside, and uncertainty about whether bombs were still active all contributed to the sense that everything was unfolding in a fog of fear and delay. Outside the school, parents gathered in panic. Many had no idea if their child were alive. Television cameras captured the confusion as students escaped the building with hands over their heads, as emergency vehicles flooded the area, and as one of the most shocking school attacks in American history unfolding in front of the entire country. And by the end, 12 students and 1 teacher were dead, with many others wounded, before the 2 attackers died inside the school. And almost immediately, the country began looking for answers. Not slow answers, not careful answers, fast answers. How could this happen? Why would they do it? What had poisoned them? And once those questions started, the search for something to blame began almost immediately. Then another detail came out of the shadows. Eric Harris played Doom. And that changed everything, because in 1999, Doom was not just any game. It was already one of the most infamous games in the world. Violent, fast, dark, famous. Even people who never played it knew exactly what kind of game this was. So the second that detail came out, Doom was no longer sitting in the background. Now it was inside the story. And it got worse, because Harris had not just played Doom. He had built maps for it. That was part of what made people panic. Playing a video game was one thing. Building inside it was something else. Now the public was not looking at someone who simply liked Doom. They were looking at someone who had spent the time creating rooms, hallways and spaces inside the same game that was not being linked to a massacre. To players, that was normal. That was one of the reasons Doom was so loved. People build maps all of the time. But outside gaming, it looked completely different. Now, Doom did not just seem violent, it seemed personal, and then came the rumor that pushed everything even further. One of the most repeated claims after Columbine was that Harris had built a Doom map based on Columbine High School itself. A version of the school inside the game. A digital practice ground. That rumor spread because it was too horrifying to ignore. And once people heard it, they almost stopped treating it like a rumor. It felt like proof. It felt like the missing piece. Because now, Doom was no longer just connected to the killer. Now it looked like part of the process. But this is where the story gets messy. Yes, Harris made Doom maps. Yes, Doom was part of his life. Yes, the connection was real. But the most dramatic version of the story, that there was a confirmed Columbine practice map inside Doom, was never as clear as people made it sound. And that barely mattered, because by then, the damage was already done. People did not remember the uncertainty, they remembered the image, and the image made Doom look guilty. That was enough. Columbine happened on April 20th, 1999. Less than 2 months later, on June 16th, Senators John McCain and Joe Lieberman introduced a bill in the Senate aimed at violent content labeling in audio and visual media. That shows how fast this was moving. This was no longer just grief. It was already turning into pressure, and Doom was right in the middle of it, because the connection to Eric Harris was already bad enough. But what made it even worse was how specific that connection looked once people started digging. Harris had made Doom WADs under the name Reb Doomer. Several of them still exist and are actually playing footage of gameplay in one of his maps and how it really looked. For example, names like UA Clubs WAD, Bricks WAD, Fight Me WAD, Hockey WAD, Killer WAD, and Station WAD survived. And once those files became part of the story, Doom stopped looking just like another violent game. Now it looked personal. In one of those file descriptions tied to UA Clubs WAD, the text ends with a line telling the player to kill them all. Another line warns people not to edit the file. On their own, those details already sound ugly. After Columbine, they sounded even more sinister. And that is what made this so damaging. The public was no longer hearing that once the killers liked Doom. They were hearing that he built inside it, that he left maps behind, that he named one of his weapons a character from Doom novels, that in the basement tapes he described the coming attacks as being like Doom, and said one shotgun was straight out of Doom. So even when some of the later rumors were shaky, there was already more than enough real material to keep the panic alive. And once that panic spread, the backlash exploded. News coverage started pulling violent games directly into the Columbine story. Parents heard the name Doom over and over again. They saw screenshots, they heard about the maps, they heard about the rumors. They heard enough to stop seeing the game as entertainment. Now it looked like evidence. Talk shows repeated the same details until they stopped sounding like claims and started sounding like facts. And then the legal side hit. On April 19, 2001, the widow and stepchildren of teacher William Sanders filed Sanders vs. Acclaim Entertainment in federal court in Colorado. The lawsuit named a huge list of defendants: Acclaim, Activision, Atari, Capcom, Eidos, ID Software, Interplay, Midway, Nintendo, Sega, Sony, Time Warner, New Line Cinema, and others. The claim was that violent games and films had helped shape the killers, and that without those companies, the massacre would not have happened in the same way. This was the moment this stopped being just a media panic. Now, people were trying to make entertainment legally answer for Columbine. But on March 4, 2002, Chief Judge Louis T. Babcock dismissed the case. The courts would not accept that chain of causation. And that says everything. Even the Doom community felt it. Doom World published an editorial defending the game. Major community figures ended up speaking publicly while Doom was being dragged through the nation's spotlight. Some archives refused to host Harris levels at all. That is how radioactive the subject had become. Not just outside Doom, but inside Doom too. And that was the real stain Columbine left on the game. And from then on, Doom was never just the revolutionary shooter game that changed gaming. it was also the game people remember being blamed. And maybe that is the darkest part. Even decades later, people still remember accusations more clearly than the evidence. This is how panic works. It does not just shape the moment, it shapes history. And that is a shadow Columbine left on Doom forever.